Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. What do you like to come away from with it? We're here at RoarCon. We're on the 20-yard line. Man.
Sure, it's pretty baller. Like, we're in the red zone by definition. Like, we're here. We're good.
In the red zone.
Yeah, there's a 2-0 right behind me. We're golden.
Yeah. What's your goal coming away from an event like this?
You know, so for me, it's all mission focused, right? What I mean by that is I found myself in a position where my HABU, my highest and best use, was no longer turning a wrench. And as I went through this highest and best use discussion, it really was, if I can train others to turn the wrench the right way, and I can grow their capabilities, then I have way more force multiplication. So what's my event when I come away with this? The nice thing about it is I'm not in sales. I don't tie into any of that space. My real goal, and our aligned incentives with the company that happens to pay for my breakfast, lunches, and dinners, is that if you grow and if you protect your clients, we make money. So what do I want to walk away with? People nodding and going, I get this. Or secondarily, people going, you're wrong, Matt. Either of those is my desired outcome, right? Because the first one means that we're going to at least have that conversation and they agree and they're moving forward, they've been empowered. The second one means perhaps they know enough to question and say, I disagree. And the nice thing about being a security practitioner is it's a lot of thought of what you think you know. It's about your application. It's about your understanding of some certain concepts. And so I just love the discourse and the conversation around it. But if I really was candid, it's, can I touch the right number of humans that are in the right state to hear this message and then go do something valuable with it. And it's all about knowing your audience. It's all about trying to understand where they are and where they really are. Interesting part about this is that people have egos. It's very interesting how this works out. And especially in a world where we've been asked to be the #1 decision maker, of the best Google guy, the one that can do this and implement it. Don't worry about it. I've got Joe and he's going to solve this problem. Turns into you having to be all those things.
Right.
So there's this built-in ego that's existing in our world that I think for the last several years has had people go, yeah, Matt, I get you, I follow you. Now that we're called to the carpets, it's, oh, I was just in for the rhetoric. I don't know what I actually have to do. And that is the unique part we're starting to make that pivot towards, is people wanting kinesthetic, actionable, tactical things. Or at least that's what I'm betting on right now. So,
what is it about security that attracts you?
I got punched in the face real hard. Like, my eyes used to point straight. I didn't have to tell somebody in the audience. For reality is that any technology over the course of human history seems to follow a similar pattern. You take it, you see that it's really cool. Let's say it's air conditioning or a car, and you're like, wow, I really want to have coolness while I sit and watch something on my radio, I suppose. Maybe watch, would it be listening? Sure. Anyways. But the point is that we take technology, we adopt it, we grow it massively, we build it into our lives, and then we go, oh my God, this can kill people. And cars followed a similar track, right? You watch the billions of deaths per miles traveled drop in the 80s, but that didn't start till the 60s. And that was 80 years after they developed the car in the 1890s. So the point is that technology, our version of technology, computers, right, are in that virgin state. They've gone this first 80 years from 1927 until the beginning of kind of our internet time in the 90s, and as that started playing out. And so what's interesting is we're just at that stage of humanity where we're like, well, maybe we need to fix this. And for me, what started me down that path was losing, a few $1 million to Soda no Kibi, or our evil ransomware gang. And that allowed us to then drive forward in the way we went there. So I would say I was forced into security, Joe. I don't know that I went in willingly. But now that I'm here,
Yeah.
it is interesting that we find ourselves understanding that security's operations, security's good practice, right? There's a Marine Corps, I think, general that did a talk as a kickoff and a commencement for college saying, make your bed in the morning. Right? I don't know if you've seen this one, but it says at least you'll have a win. And if you go out and have the worst day of your life, you've already had one success of making your bed. But I make that akin to cybersecurity as hygiene. It's about making your bed. It's about knowing what assets you have. It's about knowing what software you're running. It's about knowing who your humans are. It's about all those things. And so security is really just an extension of what we already should have been doing. I should have known what computer I issued. Why? Because that's common sense, right? So anyways, I digress, but security was forced, I suppose.
So tell me what happened, man, at the malware incident.
Yeah, so we bought a small company I call Voldemort. And it's because I won't use their name again. I know it. It's a 3-letter, which is awesome because you don't see many 3-letter domains. But the point is this company was $1 million revenue MSP. We acquired them unbeknownst to me. Not to say that I would have been able to make a different decision. I don't think that's fair. But I will say that we bought them, and within 3 months, from May to September, they integrated, brought them into the systems. I was unaware as a security director. And then all of a sudden on a Friday, they were ransomed. Their entire client base had a DNS.bat file that was executed across to all of their systems through their RMM. And as it turned out, they had actually been treated that way 3 separate times. They had actually been robbed like a piggy bank by the same threat actor 3 separate times in a year and a half. Wow. Meaning that their clients, imagine you're in a client shoe, imagine you're that end consumer, and now for the tertiary time, you've had to be told your stuff's not available, you're in this situation, we don't know what the next steps are, we're gonna have to wait, we didn't have good backups, we did have good backups. And so ultimately what happened was threat actor just used credentials that they had and that the MSP had never done any due care or due diligence as a response to figure out what happened the first time, nor the second time. They just whitewashed it and restored the server. And what I'd say is anybody listening to this, you've done it too. This is an existing conversation that people have just not historically dealt with incidents in a way that was meaningful or scalable. So we didn't either. We then had to react to that. We had to work with counsel for a year and a half. We had to work with people that were settling or suing. We had to deal with federal authorities, ultimately, as that played out. And so it gave me that passion and that understanding that if my kids and your grandkids and my grandkids are gonna have the same virgin experience with technology that we did that changed our lives so fundamentally, that we cannot continue to function this way. We must have those capabilities. And so that's literally my life mission, is trying to drive forward regulatory change, governance in our world, and an understanding of, like at some point, if you were gonna go build bridges, you couldn't just go, well, unfortunately there was a CV in that bridge and 43 people died. Sucks, but we'll be better next time. But in software you can. Like in software you can take out 8.5 million machines on a Friday and still be fine on a Monday, if I'm candid. So. Not like I'm making any elucidatory statements there, but
yeah, it's never happened.
Yeah, no.
So, what are simple things MSPs can do? Is it just the basics? Is it just MFA? Is it just complex passwords? Is it?
Oh, I wish it was that simple. I will say there's easy wins. There's lots of easy wins.
Yes.
You've named a few of them.
Yeah.
MFA, but on what? On which accounts? Do you even have a list of all of them? Do you even know where they all are? What the data is there? How sensitive it is? What its worth is? What regulatory compliance? Like that's the gap today. So what are the things they can do? The easy wins are following a framework, finding one, whether it's NIST CSF, whether it's CIS, Center for Internet Security's critical security controls, but somebody else has already fallen down. And those frameworks are just basically stove hot, don't touch stove, will burn hand. And so what the point is that MSPs have a guidebook right in front of them, and even if they implement that guidebook not well, they're building protection for themselves because they're meeting reasonable person, they're meeting that kind of due care requirement that needs to exist. So short answer is the easy wins are basically your IG1s or implementation group 1, and they're simple things like have a list of all your assets, like know all the computers in your world, have a list of the software that you're allowed to use, stop people from using assets that aren't those assets, like the basics of this. And what we like to do as humans is make ourselves free by saying, we couldn't have done this, it was way too hard. Because the reality is, these are basics that get you executed every time, and we don't want to accept that we're just not doing the basics. And so there's a protectionism of making something complex, when it's really not that complex. Because it makes it easy to say, I was doomed to fail, right? As opposed to, I could have been better and done the basics well. Nobody wants that. But I think we're at that stage where if you get that understood and you get the humility that needs to come with that to move forward with those things, you're probably where you need to be. You don't have to win every time. You just have to be doing the right things. You got to be running the bases. You got to be putting in the right batters. You got to have the right team ready. It's the basics, man. Not to simplify, but it really is. If you start with that, you're probably meeting the pretty good level. Right? I think Microsoft put out a slide about a year ago that said if you did MFA, strong auth, encrypted drives, and a few other things, you were in the bell curve of cybersecurity, that 99% of events would not have applied to you. I just want to make that set in. Like, that's big. And I think we're in that stage of maturation where people start realizing security is operations. Security is how I set up a computer. Security is how I give a credential, how I know that's actually Joe and should he be here talking. Like, those are things that are part of security. Okay, so get off on a tangent.
No, I love it.
Going, so.
What attracts you about working with MSPs?
Force multipliers. When you think about this, if I was trying to solve this at a global scale, and I had to, if you will, euphemistically choke billions of throats to get them to do the right thing, like, you better do MFA. It's easier to say, what if I just made Microsoft do it? What if I just made MSPs more ability to do that and say, hey, this is what we're going to do, this is the way we go to market. So in my mind, MSPs are the actual savior for SMB. I don't think you could serve the 43% of the GDP in the United States gross domestic production by trying to serve every single SMB. But you can use a intermediary of that practitioner of the managed service provider, TSP, whatever you want to call them every day, right? MSSP, MSP, whatever. You can use that intermediary by educating and increasing their capabilities to then increase the capabilities of the overall SMB force in the United States. That's my argument of how I think this plays out.
So just like vendors like to work with MSPs because they
that
can
scale, yeah.
It's the same thing with
Customer acquisition costs, scale, predictable outcomes, value of my product is enhanced. I think there was a study done by Canalys that says if you buy a product out in the wild, you might have a 1 to 3 year expectation of that product. But if you buy it from an MSP, it's like 17 years. Like, what a difference of buying from someone that can make your product look good, that knows how to use it, that knows how to manage it, that knows how to scale it, that knows how to function with it, or, hey, have fun, caveat emptor, end user of all varying different skills and maturity sets. So yeah, MSPs are both force multiplication in both sides, and it's somewhat cotangential.
So we kind of alluded to it, we just had the big CrowdStrike Microsoft issue, crippled thousands of flights and countless of other things.
True story.
So it's a bad patch. Is it security related?
So great question. The conditions create that. What I mean by that is you have normal patch updates of an agent, right? Something that I'm going to push out. It's got a number. It went from 1.7.1.2 to 1.7.1.2.3, right? Or whatever that might be. And so those are traditional pushed updates that are planned. They have QA. Not to say this one didn't. I'm not bashing CrowdStrike on this. But they have planned QA and rollout methodologies. But then you have this problem with security where threat actors change and rapid response is needed. And so what happens is sometimes there's a Sophie's choice of, do we roll things out fast and deal with it? And for the most part up till now, people would say you're better off protecting first and letting the damage happen and fix it later. As we see, we'll see how palatable that is to the United States in this case, right? Or globally, I suppose. But by definition, they pushed out a rapid patch update that did get tested. They tested it. It just couldn't test for the specific condition that failed. So we're in this kind of just worst case scenario where there were things in place. And then the other thing, and Joe, I broke down and cried on Friday. Like when this happened, I broke down and actually cried. I was sobbing in my chair. I'm tearing up now saying it, but I'm sitting there. And the reason is, this is where we are. To me, it dawned on me at that moment that we are so lack of resilience that we have no ability to deal with the multi-variables in our world, that we can take out 8.5 million global machines with one little accident. And I don't even mean it's like a malicious or negligent even. It was actually handled well. But even out of that, you see this world where that's where we are right now. If that was a bridge, you would not be okay with, whoops, sorry we killed 40 people, we'll do better next time on the bridge. We just haven't made that correlation. This impacts human lives. I did a post on Friday that's now at like 176,000 interactions right now, of just saying, there's real humans on the end of this, y'all. People are suffering. Don't go out there and grandstand. Don't go out and say, I'm the product that would have stopped this, because you're next. And I think that's the point, is that we're at such a state. And really, for those that know CISA, which is the United States Cybersecurity Agency, the director of CISA, Jen Easterly, is just amazing. And she put out a post on Friday that is so on point. And she said, we do not have a cybersecurity problem in this nation. We have a software quality problem in this nation. And I think there's a little hyperbole in there. But the point being is that if you look at common vulnerability every year, CVEs, the CVE list by MITRE, there's like 50, 60, 70,000 vulnerabilities. You could never build bridges with that level of failure and acuity, ever. You couldn't. People would die, it would be the end of it. You have checks and balances. We're in this stage where capitalism, and I have this theory I call the middle theory, which basically just says that capitalism doesn't often reward and doesn't often make the product more mature or very much less mature than the consuming entity. which means there's no reward to make a better spoon if nobody's going to pay me more for that spoon. But if people are asking for that better spoon, there is a capitalistic reward for it. That's the point. So my argument is that when it comes to software, the maturity of the consuming entity is zero. I mean, zero. The general populace, if you were to average that out to go, how's CrowdStrike constructed versus Angry Birds? Zero.
Wow.
So when you think about that, that means there's no drive. If you had two choices as a developer, new feature that's going to get 12 new MSPs to sign up or companies to sign up, or deal with a small bug that's a brownfield operation that may or may not be a problem. Which one does capitalism reward? Every time. And the point I'm making is that we haven't shifted as a capitalistic base enough in maturity to say, nah, bro, you can't just push a patch that kills everybody. You have to have bleeding edge testing. There has to be methodologies for you to see what this scale does, even if it is in this risk compendium of value. And like, we're not there, but there are more. There's more me's and more people out there questioning those things now than there ever were. And Jen nailed that by saying, we have a software quality problem. And it really does start putting this into capitalism to solve, in my opinion. And it always does. It always corrects. Right. We make cars that drive every day and don't kill us, right? But in the beginning, you could build a car in your garage and nobody had any regulatory or otherwise contractual constraint on what you made until now, NHTSA, which came out of the 1965 Motor Vehicle Safety Act, says, hey, you gotta have brake lights on the left and on the right. They need to be this far apart. They need to be this tight. Like, there's the guy, the Technology Connections, just rants about NHTSA's rules. But the point is, we haven't gotten to that stage in software development. We make stuff, it's beautiful, we buy it, and there's no capitalistic maturity to say, no, bro, where's your CI/CD pipeline? How do you deal with vulnerabilities? What's your vuln management process? How do you deal with a VDP? Like, all questions that really matter that nobody cares about today. So that's, without getting too deep in the weeds, what I think the problem is it's a maturity of the capitalistic buyer problem. And in other worlds, we solve that through regulatory actions, right? If you can't know everything about doctors and how they work, you have an AMA. And you start saying, here's how we know they're a doctor. And even if you call Saul Goodman to be your attorney, the worst attorney in the world, they are above the bar by definition and actuality. And so the point is like, we're not there. We haven't been there yet. And so my opinions, Joe, is we're just in an early maturity phase and still benefiting from the cool air conditioning and not realizing there's CFCs and chlorofluorocarbons and greenhouse effect and all the things, power consumption challenges, all those things. We're not there with software yet. And I don't know that we get there other than as an industry we decide what's good and what is that bare minimum. And as private equity and regulatory and lending and insurance start to play and enforce this, we won't make it to where the consumer always has to know everything. And that's the challenge today. Caveat emptor is quite in play.
My favorite Saul Goodman quote.
Okay, I didn't expect we'd connect here. This is great.
Don't drink and drive, but if you do, you better call Saul.
That's right. Yeah.
So software just ends up being another attack surface.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like the preeminent one because it's what you're living in. When you think about what is software, software is ultimately, if I like to make a kind of a connection, is the body of a company is its technology. The software is where the data flows, the data is the blood of the company. And so you have this situation where you're not inspecting the things that are going to hold the blood and check that the blood pressure is good and all those things. So yeah, software is definitely, if it has those flaws or causes those problems, it's quite built in and endemically part of the data problem there, right? The risk of that data being compromised. So.
I've seen you speak many times, Matt. You know,
I'm sorry.
No, it's always been great, always captivating. You fill the room. Now you're part of Pax8, but you never really, you're pretty product agnostic.
Yeah.
So does the product matter?
Oh, great question. Oh my goodness, you're putting me in a place. I would say the maturity of the product and the commensurate user do need to match, right? Like if I'm trying to accomplish this goal versus that goal, they need to match. Does the product matter? I think it'd be like asking a surgeon, hey man, what scalpel are you using? Oh man, I've been using that Scalpel 3000 and my numbers are so good right now because I can't. No, the surgeon's say, no, I actually train and you hand me the right scalpel within certain specs and I'm gonna go do my job. And I think that's the point, is that we haven't made that jump to understand that is a surgeon. We are talking to a practitioner. They are practicing, they're getting better, they can fail, they're going to lose some patients. It sucks. But all we need to measure is, did they do the reasonable things? This is what we do with doctors. Morbidity and mortality clinics focus on, did you follow the rules? Are you using common practices? We're not there yet. So I would say it's the surgeon more than it is the scalpel, but in the same breath, if you give me a piece of obsidian and a raw, dirty place to do this on, it's not gonna be the same as me having fat spreaders and a whole surgical suite, right? And so the challenge is, does the tool matter? Yeah, absolutely. I have to have good scalpels, good fat spreaders, great anesthesia, all those things. But if I don't know how to use them, I'm also just as screwed. You don't want to see me scrubbing up and gloving up to come do your appendectomy, right? It's probably not the right guy. No matter how good the scalpel, no matter whether you have a Houdini robot or some automation, it's probably still never going to be me, right? And sorry about popping your mic there, but the point is that it is the tool, but in the same way, it could be made up for a lot by the practitioner. And we hear the roaring in the background.
Yeah, so we're at RoarCon. We're going to hear roars. Yeah, I don't know. It's my contention. I could be way off on this. Oh, is it a competition?
It seems like it might be. Yeah, yeah.
So far, they're winning.
I think this left side, yeah.
Many MSPs are overtooled.
I would agree.
You know,
I would agree. For a guy that sells
the three of
tools.
us?
Yeah, we'll go roar! No.
So, yeah, I think your point, please correct me, is focus more on the practice than the tool.
Yeah, and the tools will figure themselves out. Once you know what your surgeon is and how they like their scalpel, they'll be like, yeah, I really like the Scalpel 2000. That's my favorite, and I can use it the best for my client base, and it's shorter, and I can get in smaller places, whatever. I'm not a surgeon.
Sure.
Again, we don't want me
we're
scrubbing
making
up.
that analogy,
Yeah, but the point is I think there is a bare minimum, and there is a bare efficacy minimum. And one of the things I'm working on, Joe, is like, what is that bare taxonomical sorting that needs to be there for that tool to be that tool to solve that problem? That hasn't really been done in our world. But if you go do a scalpel, you know what a fat spreader is, you know what a scalpel is, you know. And in our case, we let some company called Gartner make up what our scalpel is.
Wow.
It's a very interesting world we live in, right? That just doesn't happen in a lot of other spaces in that way. So.
Where's AI taking security?
I think if we focused on the fact that the basics are security and operations are security, AI comes at an interesting place in time where what AI needs to flourish is normalization, standardization, right? And those kind of capabilities, which means if everybody's heading to Microsoft Entra or Google Identity or Okta or Ping or name it, and then everybody's heading down this path of using SharePoint or using this one type of file sharing, then the variable delineation gets really small. And you wind up with very normalized looking operations with different people doing stuff, but the same SharePoint, the same identity, the same those things. Well, AI and machine learning in general just loves entropy. It really loves this ability for things to be the same, but also, right, repeatable and scalable. I guess not entropy would be the opposite thereof. But the point being is they love having the same way you see a piece of data. So why do I say all that? I believe that AI and its growth and capability will help us find what is an asset. What was the machine that actually should be? What is that Joe? Like, there's so many of those things that can be used. But at the same time, it also lowers the barrier to entry for threat actors to be threat actors. It also makes it easier for you to do social engineering campaigns. And what I'll really say is, every time a new weapon or a new wall is developed, it's always both sides. It's a great wall, but it's also equally what sticks you in the city whenever they're bombarding the city. Like, so there's these dualities of everything. I would say AI probably does more for us in both exposing it and also how we go to scale this answer than we could have done in a non-normalized world that we find ourselves in. If this had happened 20 years ago, not the same level of impact as it does when every Microsoft email is the same and every identity is the same, the way it scales is the same. You start seeing those things play out, which means you can look for anomalies better because they are more anomalous, because they're not as normalized. And so I feel AI and machine learning are at the right time with the right weapons to be very amazing for the benefit of positive protection. The challenge is, without getting really nerdy, which too late, is you have probabilistic solutions and then deterministic solutions. AI is not deterministic, at least not in its current LLMs or language models today. It's more probabilistic, meaning that it's not great at finding out exactly what this is, but it's really good at going, it's probably this. And so what we have to start realizing is where are the appropriate places to use probabilistic solutions and where are the appropriate places to use deterministic solutions. And when it comes to cyber, you need both. There are both that play out, and the right place to use them really does matter, I think. So a little bit off in the
You're optimistic.
I am optimistic, yeah. But I'm optimistic that everything in time does tend to get better. I mean, if we were honest about the challenges we face today, I really like my air conditioning. Like, I really like sitting in my boxers watching TV. I have no problem with that. And even though we've been through hard times, they always seem to get towards a level of acceptable points. And if you look at cars back in 1897 until the mid-1980s, the death per billion miles traveled was massive. But that starts to taper off as you get there to where we get to this acceptable level of death that's well within what we're okay with as a capitalistic society and risk. We need to get there, if that makes sense. And that's where this technology is heading. And as we go forward, it could be, it always works out. Not to mean there aren't some people chained to the bottom when the water rises. And that's what I would try to be avoiding as an MSP, is how do I continue to iterate along with the pace of this water rise without killing myself by going too fast and jumping out of the water, or by being chained to the bottom and drowning when the water rises. And so that's the balancing act of living in this world.
You mentioned, I want to go back for a second. So you bought this MSP and they'd already been attacked a couple times and they got attacked again after you acquired them. If this is an MSP, if there's an MSP out there looking to acquire another MSP, what should they be doing to check for this kind of history?
Well, I mean, first off, the evidence was there. They told them, and they bought an insurance policy and said, don't worry about it, we're good, we're insured. I will tell you, first off, indemnification and insurance do not take away the people telling you, hey, Joe, I hate you, I wish I'd never met you, you destroyed my business, my family hates you, you can't go to church. Those things are not insured away, right? Those things aren't, I'm going to tear up, but those things are not insured away. And so the argument is that we have to get to a stage where we're ready to deal with, when I buy an MSP, in my opinion, you keep them at arm's length for about 90 days, you figure out how they operate, all to build how I'm going to destroy them and bring them into my fold. And if I'm talking to an MSP out there, I'm a big, big fan of integration. I'm a big, big fan of doing it the same way, the same how, the same tools, the same skills, the same scalability, because otherwise it's chaotic and it goes against that normalization statement I made. So when it comes to how we buy, the one thing that I say is quite important is be prepared to integrate. And I think for a lot of MSPs out there that are not integrating, they're buying and just keeping them at arm's length, and I think there's a benefit and a risk to that. Less cost of integration, but more risk that every individual entity could be doing things differently with different tools, different capabilities, that then lead you to, maybe if I'm McDonald's at some point and I eat a bad burger, I'm probably suing McDonald's, not the franchisee, right? And so you get into this battle where, big fan of integration. Very specifically, I would say, set minimum standards of what you buy. If you say, I'm not going to buy something that had a massive breach and those things, it'll drive pressure down on those companies that aren't dealing with it. But at the same time, maybe it's about how they inspected it, how they responded to it. Like now I would say, I need to see if you've had a major incident, show me your incident response report. Show me the DFIR that says you walked out of this, you knew what the problem was and you've solved it. Those are the things. And I would say, if I'm advocating to anybody doing M&A, I would change EBITDA multipliers based on the response to those things. And I might not give you 4 times EBITDA, I might give you 3, I might not give you 10 times EBITDA, it might be 9. And you start getting into, only capitalism can fix a capitalism problem. And so in my mind, it's not about the stigma of having had an incident of why I would buy or not buy you. It's about how I plan on dealing with it within my own risk tolerance and not letting the buying entity that I'm buying, the acquisition target, be what dictates my risk, right? I think that's the way I would say it, and be glad to get into a deep conversation with somebody about my thoughts on the matter. But it's really about having something you can stand by and be repetitive in how you look at and acquire companies. And I would encourage you to use capitalism as a methodology. Let somebody else buy that death. I'm telling you, we bought $1 million company. It cost us $3 million in overarching impact. So it can be worse than the dollars you spent, right, in risk and impact. So, yeah.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with 1 or 2 of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.